right, so welcome to another session of Zero Trust Journey. My name is Victor Monga. I am the host of this podcast, video on podcast. Someone asked me actually when we started this conversation that why do I say it? Because it's a funny story. When we started this podcast, I didn't think of video on podcast, and I invite my guest as, hey, it's a podcast. And when we get to here and they're like, hey, I didn't realize that I need to turn on my video. So now I make sure I say broadcast. So it's video on podcast. Again, we're going to be talking about zero trust. We're going to be talking about personal stories, journeys. Today with me, I have a special guest, Jose from Attack IQ. Jose is based out of San Diego, director of solution engineering at Attack IQ, a great person who loves to give back to the community and being a great friend to me as well. Jose, welcome.
Hi, Victor. Thanks for having me. Nice to be on and to have a chat.
Absolutely. All right. Before we get to the serious topic of zero trust, I always start with this one. I'm a coffee lover, Jose. So give us your funny, either real or fictitious story about coffee and anything you can share about coffee. Let's start with there.
About coffee?
Yeah, just coffee.
All right. Interesting topic.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think for me, my wife, she's super proud that one of the best gifts she got for me is actually an automatic coffee maker. So
Nice.
I actually buy coffee from a local roaster called Zoombar.
Okay.
I actually used to take the train to work every day, and this place Zoombar was there, and apparently it's one of the most snobbiest coffee shops in San Diego, like the best beans, best roasters, and they spoiled me. So I still get their beans. I now make them, and my little machine makes me espresso every morning from
Nice.
fresh ground beans. So yeah, that's
So wait,
as you asked that question.
yeah, last time we met in San Diego, that's not where we met, right? That was not Zoombar. The coffee shop was not Zoombar, was it?
That was not Zoombar. No, that was a place that you picked. I was gonna suggest somewhere else, but I hadn't tried the place you suggested, so I figured let's check out
Okay.
something nearby. So, and the place is pretty good actually. They made pretty good coffee.
Well, next time when we're in town, let's go to Zoombar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Typically, I don't do the traditional way of introductions here. I always ask this question that how did you end up in zero trust? When did you hear about zero trust? So give our listeners, our audience about when was the first time you heard zero trust and you're like, what is this? Or you were like, yeah, this totally makes sense. So give us a little bit about that journey or that word in your vocabulary.
Yeah, I think for me, zero trust is definitely I don't know, rings a bell for me, or I don't know what a better way of saying that would be.
Sure.
But I feel like it's a good example of kind of the cyclical nature of our industry a little bit. And what I mean by that is I think for one aspect of zero trust, which I think is interesting, is at the end of the day, it's a process and a brand new construct. Anytime someone brings that up, I feel like this is very similar to a lot of things in cybersecurity, where companies will like to say they have a product for X, Y, or Z, when the reality is that thing, in this case zero trust, is actually a process and a construct that we have to manage, right, as a SOC team, as a company, as a business, and not really something that you can just buy off the shelf and we're 100% zero trust. So I think there's that aspect. The second aspect where I think it's very cyclical to me is this is very much in line with a concept of, something like a DMZ or a whitelist only type of environment where, all we're really saying is like, hey, let's be really structured about what should and should not be communicating to one another, what should and should be allowed. And let's apply that, again, as part of a process, as part of that construct. And by the way, as I say that, I know I'm really simplifying the concept of zero trust. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot more than that than just whitelisting. But just when the concept first came about and the concept of getting described, it just felt like that to me when I first engaged it myself.
I think that a lot of people, that's how they feel. When they heard about zero trust, they felt that there is a structured way of doing the things we have been doing. what it's in there, microsegmentation, actually making sure that it's least privileges applied. A lot of those core tenants, that's what we've been preaching. That's what we've been saying. But now there's a structured way of actually thinking about it, programmatical way of implementation. So I think that kind of cohesively makes a story when we think about zero trust architecture and all that. And you said it right. A lot of times our industry have a disease, I would call it, where we pick up a new term and we say everything is all about this. Zero trust
Yeah.
AI is a hot topic right now. Everything is either zero trust or AI or both. One of the
Yep.
funniest thing I have heard, and I think I talked about that on our previous show as well, where I was actually attending a conference and one of the vendors actually said, we are zero trust certified. I don't even know what
Mhm.
that means.
Right.
There's no committee or council who can actually approve your product as zero trust certified. You can be part of zero trust architecture. You can help mature the journey of zero trust. But I don't know if I buy your Blinky box and I'll be zero trust. So that also is where we are confusing the customers, right? So to your point, when you heard zero trust, when you hear zero trust, it's a lot of it is what the great work you already put into your program, already are maturing it, but now there's a programmatical way, systematical way of thinking about it. So, Jose, at Attack IQ, when you go in and talk to your customers, your primary goal is to actually measure the effectiveness of their security controls, actually looking at what they have already deployed and telling them, are they good or do they need to tune and tweak about it? So when you're looking at it, does the zero trust conversation comes up? Do they say that, hey, we have implemented based on zero trust architecture? Can I validate the controls based on zero trust architecture, or does it come in different ways? So give us a little bit about that.
Um, Absolutely. I think people absolutely come at us and ask it exactly how you asked it, right? Can you help me validate zero trust? My first response, my first feedback is I think, well, two pieces. I think one is, well, what is zero trust for you? Right? And that's important because we have to understand, are they fully implemented in an agreement with what they want to do? Are they in the process of rolling this out? Because they want to, or is it in the process of rolling it out because they have to? I work with a lot of for example, just contractors that might do work with the government as an example. That just happens to be where I see it most, where they're doing it as part of that requirement to work with them. So I think, and then what I say is like I remind them again, this is a process. So once I understand what you've done here to meet your zero trust goals, that we can validate the underlying technology that helps provide that, right? You mentioned microsegmentation as an example. What's your ability to actually segment the environments, and are the assumptions you made about that segmentation true? Right? You should expect to have certain visibility into applications and errors on that side of the house. Is that function of an OWASP top 10 as an example type of requirement being violated actually being detected and logged as part of the process, which brings us to you having visibility into the zero trust environment that you've built. So that's really where our focus is there's underlying technologies, controls that provide us the capabilities that zero trust asks for, and we're there to help validate it as part of our work and what we do here at Attack IQ.
I love it. So I know when we talk about zero trust for core tenants, and I repeat that during every show so that if there's some new listener, at least you get that. We start with authentication. We always talk about access is the new perimeter. We always talk about where
Mhm.
now we need to make sure that every time the request is validated and verified, every time you are actually accessing enterprise applications, either it's SaaS, PaaS, on-prem, public cloud, doesn't matter where it is, but if there is a sensitive data there, there is something I need to make sure that I'm protecting. I perform an authentication verification.
Mhm.
Then we talk about microsegmentation, which is a lot on the networking layer where I need to actually really contain the widespread, really get to the point where I minimize that attack surface to the point where it's going to happen. We all know that. We know the notion of it's not about if it's going to happen, it's going to when it's going to happen. So the point is that the fourth tenant, so authentication, microsegmentation, least privilege, the fourth is continuous verification. And I
Mhm.
feel like, Jose, that's where people have failed completing that zero trust architecture, because we put technologies, detection and prevention, the piece where people lack or forget, or because it's not proactive, continuous verification. Going in and looking at what you have set up as control. Is it good enough? After patching, is it still good enough? Is it increasing your
Right.
risk or reducing your risk? Talk to me about a story, or a customer story without naming name, obviously, where they were thinking about zero trust or have evolved into zero trust, and you went in and actually helped them mature that fourth core tenant or the pillar of continuous verification.
Yeah, the story that comes to mind, I think for me, was part of our goal is either to test controls, but also to replicate attacker behavior. And we actually went. I actually was working with a bank, and this bank had just implemented a very specific NAC, network access control capabilities around their zero trust program, specific to ATMs. So the idea with the ATMs is that in production, each ATM should be completely isolated. There's zero reasons for them to talk to one another. And then, of course, there's a number of segmentation communication items that are there, controls, logging, and all that. Well, when we showed up, actually not expecting to test on the Windows ATM server, but the person had that available. So I said, great. Well, what do you guys have in place? Again, they had just spent a few $1 million on this network access control. So I said, let's go ahead and test that. So what we did is we've, installed our technology on one machine, which is where we started the attack from. What we did is we were able to successfully steal credentials. From there, we were able to enumerate the environment, just did a simple Nmap scan to discover other assets. That led me to discover about 180 assets, I believe, out of which about 60 of them I was able to successfully move laterally to, meaning the credentials we just captured we used to move laterally across the environment. And then finally, from that second machine, those 60 machines, I should say, that were the second hop over, we were able to successfully exfiltrate data via DNS A records. So this is a good example where, they've built this entire program and had certain expectations from their technologies. But when we actually put them in the test, when we verified, the technology simply wasn't implemented as expected. The NAC solution just wasn't microsegmenting how it should. Ports, protocols, whether standard or non-standard, were available. That shouldn't have been the case. That should have been tightly managed and controlled. The assets should not have been able to talk to one another. The endpoint itself was set to detect only, so they had the right policies, but they didn't have the right policies from an enforcement perspective, meaning that we were allowed to get credentials to begin with. And then finally, none of the context from both of the technologies that I described actually ended up in their SIM. So they had a logging problem. So, and that leads me to a second story, working with a separate bank. But I think this is a good kind of additional story to share here. After pitching what we do and just the basic concept of testing, his feedback was, I've been in situations where we have an event. We spin up our IR team and we get to the firewall, and we just found out that we haven't been logging anything for the past 12 weeks, which means a forensic investigation is not going to be possible at that point, let alone the construct of zero trust that we're talking about. So those are two stories that came to mind, Victor, as you share that, as to, it's one thing to have a plan and to implement it, but why it's so important to have a process to validate and verify the things they're implementing. In the case of that NAC solution, that had been installed 18 months prior. Who knows how long it wasn't working? It got tested at deployment, but somewhere between deployment and the 18 months after I got there, that thing wasn't working anymore. And those are the kind of things that we want to notice early, often, before the attacker gets a chance to discover those things.
And you know this. This is my passion: continuous security validation and continuous security verification of security control. That's an area I research, I survey, I connect with the people who are in the space. Um, I think it helps with two ways actually. When you're thinking about zero trust architecture, first, it actually helps you identify your gaps so that you don't go buy next blinky light. You actually realize what you really need. It helps you build your RFP. It helps you build your right requirements so that you're not buying a product and then actually trying to fit into your architecture. You're buying the product what fits into your architecture. So that's one. Starting where, looking at your gaps, it helps you. And the second is, once you have actually implemented the technologies to actually realize your architecture, continuously verify, continuously check it, because the controls changes. It's too soon to say cross-strike, but again, those sort of things where even the technology companies fail customers. So we can't trust anyone. That's the point here, that we cannot trust anyone. That includes the vendors, supply chain companies that who actually interact with your organization. They have access to your intellectual property. So continuously verifying that part as well. Continuously always checking what you have implemented and is it good enough, and trying to find the places where it needs maturity. I think that in itself is the most important pillar, in my opinion, when it comes to zero trust.
Yeah, and I think something that you sparked in me as you described that too is kind of two concepts. One being resilience, and the second one actually, you know, well, let's get to the second a little bit. But first of all, resilience is, I think we do have to build these systems in a way that are very very resilient. To your point, we recently had a major endpoint issue affect things globally, as an example. So we need to take considerations of, if something goes down, are we able to still be functional and operational? So that's super important. From a resilience perspective. Another concept I think you made me think of too is this concept of things being ephemeral in cloud, right? It wasn't practical before to, let's say, redeploy the entire network stack, for this environment, because I mean you used to have to take down the firewall, replace the firewall, configure the firewall physically. Nowadays we talked about this in the past, right, Victor? We like to stand up labs and play with technologies with Terraform scripts, but you can define all that in code nowadays. And there's any issues, any test that finds that something is actually off, you just click with a click of a button, can go ahead and redeploy the entire architecture. It's been completely reset to that state that it should be at. So I think there's also a paradigm shift that needs to happen. Is doing these new concepts using the old ways is not going to be the best approach. So I think as you guys are actually engaging, at your company, having to implement these type of technologies, keep that in mind and think about, with more testing, that means that you're going to get results that you're going to have to action on. How can you keep up with all the things that might come out of testing and finding that you have issues? Because you are going to be demanded and asked to address them. So yeah, keeping those things in mind is super important, I think.
Absolutely, 100%. As we are heading towards the wrap of this session, I will address one question that's asked repeatedly, that zero trust, there is so much out there. There is so much content, technologies, there's so much that people can read, watch, learn. Where do I start? And usually I chuckle on those sort of questions, because it's like you have been doing work already. Now you just have to actually look at it programmatical way, systematical way, and the complexity is not there if you actually break it down to the level where you can actually munch on it. Zero trust is not complex. The industry myths and the, let's say, bad actors made it complicated so that you're not implementing it. Honestly, it's not difficult at all. If you actually break down the architecture of zero trust and how to implement it, it's not difficult. But the biggest part is, again, just like any good coach will tell you, you got to start somewhere. Don't try to boil the whole ocean. Don't try to actually figure it out, every little piece of it. Start somewhere. Look at the core tenants, look at the pieces, look at the controls, and then start actually somewhere. Take the credit of your good work already that you have started and done and matured your program. Now you just got to take credit of it and build on top of it in a systematical, programmatical way. So, with that, Jose, any words of wisdom as we wrap this session up?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that we see a lot of in our industry is, there's that quote, perfection is the enemy of good. I think to your point, we don't have to, implement the entire grandiose program all at once.
Yeah.
Making progress in one area is enough and is valuable. And start there and get some wins, and then convince the business to kind of continue to do some other things. So that's kind of my immediate feedback. And I think the last thing in terms of, to answer the question directly, someone once asked is, why don't we have things like, finance has for GAAP, which, general accounting practices, right? As an example. And the response from the moderator was, we've been tracking finances since the pyramids, in Egypt, right? We've only been doing cybersecurity for maybe a few decades. So I think what we're seeing here with concepts and constructs like zero trust is that we're starting to standardize some things, come and put together some guidance and having some agreements on what are the best practices for our industry. So I think while it's a little confusing right now, I think with time as an industry, we'll figure it out and give better guidances of, what's a good place to start, what's a good place to improve, and then what's the ultimate place to be. Those things will get more clearly defined. I think I look back at concepts like vulnerability and patch management. That's very, very clearly defined now. Very, strict regiments and guidelines that you can follow, where, 20 years ago, that necessarily wasn't the case. There was a lot of disinformation like I see today with zero trust. Disinformation is, I think, a wrong way of putting it, but just contradicting information, I should say, is something to watch out for here. And we used to see it before, and we don't see it with vulnerability and patch management. So I think this just means that our industry is growing and maturing and getting better.
Yes. And you said it right. Cybersecurity and the whole IT and the computer is just few decades. Most of the professionals like doctor and the finances, they've been around from the beginning of the time, right? So thank you very much, Jose. Insightful conversation. Again, always enjoy and great to have you on these shows. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. Take care.
Take care. All right.